And we're back. Sydney Barracks, Hyde Park Barracks, Sydney, Australia, episode 4. We left off with the tale, story, legend of the architect of this institution, Francis Greenway. These are storytelling institutions. If you missed that, I suggest you back up to the previous episode, 3, and enjoy the performance of that particular story. It does not disappoint. Let us move ahead. This part of the exhibit at the Sydney Barracks is a reminder of the extent to which the British invested in the shipment of more than 160,000 convicts from England and Ireland to down under. The extent to which they relied on this particular form of social innovation throughout New South Wales, Tasmania, Western Australia. There are so many, hundreds upon hundreds of sites for penal convicts. And this is just a visual reminder of the extent, how expansive, how ambitious this program was of transportation. Now, many European powers, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Dutch, for example, had relied on some form of transportation or another, but nothing compares to this remarkable, to use a word, ambitious campaign to move thousands of prisoners from one part of the globe to another to build an outpost of the British Empire. Let's move on. Now this gives us an idea of how Greenway's architecture was expressed through this institution. Let's hone in on some activity here, because this is just not a model of the institution. It gives us a glimpse as to how the convicts were funneled in and out of the gateway here on their way to the work site in the morning after a meal, and then returning to the institution for a second meal, and then off to the crib where they slept, and then resume the routine the following day. What is actually taking place here is a form of inspection. The guards were stationed at this gateway, and when prisoners, rather convicts, because again, this wasn't technically a prison, this was secured accommodations. The convicts, when they left in the morning, very often the guards had a long stick, and they would inspect the convicts leaving the institution in the morning on their way to the work site, and they used this long pole, this long stick, to lift the shirt and coat of the convict to see whether he actually had a second layered shirt under his top shirt that he was confiscating, that he was lifting, that he was stealing from the institution. Because then he would then go to his work site and he would see an emancipated convict or someone who was never a convict but a settler building a pub or a hotel or a restaurant, and he would make a deal. He would sell that shirt. And the guards got onto this, and they were very keen to keep these convicts from sticking it to the man. by stealing a shirt and then getting some compensation, unlawful compensation at that. Off to the left, let me draw briefly attention here. These are courts. That's a courthouse. And there were magistrates who were assigned the task of hearing complaints from convicts. Again, the convict system was an elaborate scheme that had oversight by the courts. And should a convict have a legitimate complaint that he was forced to work more hours on a workday, and if that could be substantiated, and if he could forcefully issue his complaint to the magistrate, he might very well receive compensation. What this speaks to is a wider sense of order. This wasn't simply a manipulative, exploitive enterprise without oversight. There was a sense of order and procedure. And I'm foreshadowing because we're going to talk more about this as the discussion continues. Let's move on. Now, in the previous episode, we looked at an image that contained a cat of nine tails, inviting curious visitors to pick it up and pretend that they're flogging their brother, their little brother, and they're all pretending to engage in their imagination of what it might be like to be a convict in Sydney, Australia, in the barracks, and so on and so forth. That's part of the performance. That's part of the drama. But what this segment of the exhibition provides is actually some visual evidence of really what the cat of nine tails inflicts, and that is not just bodily pain and agony, but also scarring. Hence, that's the etymology of the cat of nine tails. It leaves cat scratch scars, permanent scars. You've heard the phrase, a marked man. A marked man is someone who has undergone flogging by the cat of nine tails, because you're not going to be able to wish those scars away. They are permanent. The British Navy was really the innovators of the cat of nine tails to instill discipline on sailors. And they kept the cat of nine tails in a bag. And so you don't want to let the cat out of the bag. Hence more of a vernacular. These words and phrases have historical resonance. And of course, in cramped quarters, in the hold of the ship, the British Navy, oftentimes there was not enough room to swing a cat. There you go. As a cultural vehicle, these instruments of torture oftentimes have their own cultural legacy, and they make their way into the way we talk. Not enough room to swing a cat. He's a marked man. Don't let the cat out of the bag. We're not through with this at all. These are historical notations recorded by the medical staff. William McLaughlin, America. America refers to the ship that transported him to Australia. Having stole a pair of shoes in his possession, 50 lashes. The skin was lacerated at the 25th lash. On being taken down, the blood began to run freely. The prisoner did not cry. He, however, seemed to feel great agony. Say no more. What about this poor bloke over here? John Lennon. John Lennon, the convict. on a ship called Mangles. Absent one night from the barrack without leave, 25 lashes. The skin tore at the 8th lash and a slight bleeding at the 15th. At the 12th, at the 13th, the skin was decidedly flayed off, the blood flowing slightly. The blood, flesh much swollen. The severity of the man's punishment was manifest, to say the least. He says he was never flogged before. I could not discover any marks of punishment on his back. This is what the medical examiner, member of the medical staff, was required to record. And these wounds have been inscribed in medical notations, but also the historical record. That's why history matters, because it sets the record straight. Now you're looking at the dormitory with these hammocks. And visitors are invited to lay in the hammocks, get their picture taken. You know, it's all part of the performance. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just pointing it out as a sociologist. And you might say, oh, this is like summer camp. Now, this is like, you might remember in the year 2019 in the U.S., at the border, U.S. and Mexico, the separation of families and putting kids in cages and so on and so forth, and a member of the Trump administration said in a press conference, well, it's really like summer camp. Let's reflect on that. Is this summer camp? We're going to come back for the next episode. Talk more about summer camp.